Levi. Levi.
Am I the only one who can't hear anything?
I also can't hear anything. Rebalter. Rebalter.
It's very, very practical. As you said, it's all the time. Go to work. Morning. And stay there. Let's go look at my notes.
We're gonna look what's happening.
Taharas. That could be asking a shaila. The halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha, by definition, are very, very personal. They're private. We feel uncomfortable speaking about these things, and it's a natural thing, and it's a healthy thing to feel uncomfortable to discuss. It's not unhealthy. It's a good thing. We feel the need. is usually not a good recipe, not a very good for good health. The proper way of getting good health, good medical care is, yes, you should do your own research, and yes, you should speak to people that you feel comfortable speaking to, but ultimately the way you get proper medical care is if you speak to a medical professional. Not going into the COVID discussion, just you speak to a medical professional that you trust, and this is a person that you speak to with regards to all your matters. It's true in general with regards to halacha, and I should say that the discussion on Taharas Hamishpacha can't be an isolated conversation. Although tonight we're talking about Taharas Hamishpacha, and Taharas Hamishpacha is a fundamental mitzvah in the life of a Yid, but you can't completely isolate Taharas Hamishpacha from the rest of Yiddishkeit. You know, Taharas Hamishpacha, when you're careful with, it's good. You know, every person has to have the particular mitzvah that you're careful with, or a mitzvah that you're particularly careful with. So if you choose to make Taharas Hamishpacha that mitzvah, that's an amazing thing, and the brachas that you have from it are unbelievable. But it's not a mitzvah in isolation of the rest of the mitzvahs. Also, more about that in Yirtzeh Hashem later on. What does this mean? When a lot of Yiddishkeit we know because we grew up in a certain environment, whether we grew up in a frum home, so we heard from our parents, or we became Baalei Tshuva and we spoke to the rabbis that we got involved with, and we were at their homes, and we Fabrengen and so on, and that's how our Yiddishkeit is shaped, and that's how it moves, that's how it goes from generation to generation. That's how the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition, is passed on, and that's how our life and our Yiddishkeit is shaped, and that's good. But there are certain areas of life, particularly Taharas Hamishpacha, that's not the case. It's usually not discussed with parents. It's usually not discussed with the rabbis that get us involved in Yiddishkeit. It's usually not discussed with a mashpia when you're a baruch in yeshiva. So it's not discussed with anybody until 3 weeks before you got married. You had this crash course. You had no clue what you were talking about. Half of the time you're thinking about if the caterer, if your wife's going to, your colleague is happy with the caterer, or with the photographer, or the apartment was found already, and you get busy with a bunch of different things. After you get married, you have to get busy with finding your job or finding a kollel, and you got to get into this kollel, but you didn't get paid, so you have to find your tutoring job. So your mind becomes busy with a lot of other things. So then you have practical questions, and your friend in kollel told you that this is way. In other words, there's no Mishnah Misuderes of properly understanding and dealing with and addressing the issues and the sugya of Taharas Hamishpacha. That's usually the case, and it's an unfortunate thing. Baruch Hashem, in a lot of situations, that's changing and that's improving. But in the lives of very many people, whether they grew up in frum homes or they grew up in homes that were not frum, but embrace Yiddishkeit at a later point in life, the way they learned how to keep this mitzvah is very, very limited, and is very amateur. So how do you properly deal with this? So one way of dealing with this is you make a kviyas, you sit down and you learn it. In fact, the Rebbe suggested to people that they should learn the halachos with their wife. It's a good idea. But even without sitting down and learning the halachos properly, something that's absolutely fundamental is to speak to a rav, a posek that understands the halachos, that not just understands or knows the halachos, and that you develop a relationship with, and you could actually communicate with, as opposed to going online and self-diagnosing, going online and finding, could I find a heter for X, Y, and Z? I heard somebody said something to somebody, and therefore, okay, fine, so this is okay. Worse yet, I mean, I don't know which is worse, self-diagnosing yourself, deciding what the halacha is based on something that you find on some type of website that is legitimate or not legitimate, or you fully understood, you didn't understand. We have to overcome that discomfort, or whatever it is, the obstacle that gets in our way from not speaking to a rav, with regards to halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha. It's an obstacle for many people. It is, and it's really not necessary. And it's there's no need for it. A rav that deals with these shilas often deals with so many different types of shilas that they probably don't remember the issues that you deal with, and there's the issue of discomfort will bring up something that's so uncomfortable. If he's answering these types of shilas, he deals with these shilas often, and it's a non-issue. It's not something that's strange in your own life. Well, this is what happens a lot of times in our life, that something becomes uncomfortable in our own mind. And because they're uncomfortable in our mind, we project that and we say to, we think that it's uncomfortable in other people's minds as well. And that's not the case. If the Rabb's dealing with it, they're dealing with it all the time, hopefully. And there should be nothing embarrassing, even if it's something that you feel extremely uncomfortable with, but it's something that must be addressed with the Rav. I've seen many situations from Chassidish Yidden. I'm not talking about people that came to Taharas Hamishpacha later on in their life. I'm talking about a person that grew up in home, person that grew up knowing that Taharas Hamishpacha is something so important, but yet felt some type of discomfort for one reason or another to speak to a Rav. And it brought unnecessary stress and anxiety and tzaras in their married life for no good reason. If there's something is beyond our control. Hashem runs the world. Each one of us has our own peckle that we schlep around with us for better or worse. That's a reality. But then there are certain things that if we did something about it, if we discussed this with somebody, this issue would fall away or be dealt with in a much better way. So I think that if you're not going to walk away with anything else but this, if you don't yet have a particular pasuk that you deal with regards to the halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha, I want to highly recommend that tonight be the night that you say, you know what, I'm going to develop such a relationship with a Rav. That is a person that you'll communicate with, and you'll ask your questions, and you'll discuss whatever the issues are. And this Rav will have an idea of who you are and understand when it's appropriate to be machmer, when it's appropriate or when it's necessary to be mekel. But once you have a rapport with a Rav, once the Rav understands who you are to some degree or another, we're not talking about developing some type of very close relationship that you have to, but when you speak to a Rav and you have the Rav understands you, as opposed to the, so to speak, dialogue of reality that we live in today. Could I ask you a question? Who do you usually speak to? I spoke to this Rav, but I called him and didn't pick up. So you have on speed dial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And just goes like what's it called, the rollover phone calls. Okay, if you don't reach this one, it automatically goes to the next one. And that's not a healthy way of living. Yes, sometimes it's an urgent case, you need to have an answer immediately. But often, particularly the shilas of Taharas Hamishpacha, they don't just come up in a vacuum suddenly out of nowhere. They start in, usually have advanced warning. You have a few days, so it's appropriate to deal with questions properly and to develop a relationship with a Rav properly. To be able to be dealt with properly. Now, sometimes it happens that people's discomfort with asking shilas is because they had a negative experience. They spoke to a Rav, they didn't give them time of day, they brushed them off, he was impatient. It happens. Rabbanim didn't answer these types of questions. They're also human beings. And sometimes they could have a bad day. And sometimes you misunderstood what they were saying. They misunderstood what you were saying. Maybe you caught them in a second where they couldn't speak, so they were rushing to get off the phone, but they tried to answer you. So you took that as, he hung up on me. No, he was trying to help you, but he was in a rush. So he helped you quickly and then he hung up. So there are practical things that sometimes causes people to, what type of shilas should a person ask? In general, so I think that this is a once again, I'm talking about fundamentals in Taharas Hamishpacha. Taharas Hamishpacha is a fundamental of Yiddishkeit. Having a relationship with the Rav with whom we discuss shilas of Taharas Hamishpacha is absolutely fundamental, not just with regards to Taharas Hamishpacha, with regards in general living as a Yid, but how much more so with regards to Taharas Hamishpacha. Now, what are questions with regards to Taharas Hamishpacha? The range is very wide. They're very practical questions. And over here, I've seen this in the little experience that I have. Sometimes people are machmer unnecessarily. And sometimes people are mekel unnecessarily. And both of them are not good. To be machmer unnecessarily is simply not okay. It's not okay. It's not a hidur mitzvah. I'm talking about unnecessary chumras. I'm not talking about chumras that are appropriate. There are those as well. But there's very often people that have shilas with regards to certain maras or so on. So they're going to be machmer. Who created this chumrah? Who said that this is a problem? Who said that this mara is not is an issue? Who told you to be machmer? Why did you decide that this is a chumrah? Maybe you're just making your life miserable and making your wife's life miserable. So are you being machmer? You're just being a chamar. You're just being a donkey. You're completely disconnected with what's going on in your home. There's a big difference between the two. Chumrah for a chassid has to live a betara with hidurim, absolutely, to keep Shulchan Aruch properly. But just to take on things or to live in a way because simply it doesn't work for me, because I can't be bothered to ask somebody a shayla. I'll decide on my own. That's not okay. That's not okay. So what types of questions are asked? Sometimes you get the question. So if this is a mara that is presented. So is this okay? Is it not okay? So give an answer whether it's okay or not. And if I assume, based on the fact that you're saying that it's not okay, could I assume that this is the case with all future maras that I see? And this is, I find this to be, maybe other Rabbanim have better answers for this. I don't. I have a big problem with answering this question. The issue of answering maras, sometimes people are very flippant about. It's a color. It's not. Yeah, it's true. It's colors, but in order for to train your eye to discern between this shade and that shade is not simple. Even if you're good at telling colors, it's not simple to be able to discern this. And sometimes in a certain light, something looks like this, in a certain light, something looks like that. So I know myself. You know yourself. That's exactly the point. But you don't know tens, hundreds, thousands of other maras. Certain maras look like they're problematic, but they're really not. Some maras look perfectly okay, but they have a certain spot that completely throws it off. And sometimes you have a spot that looks terrible, but in fact, this spot is perfectly fine. And this really comes with experience. It really comes with dealing with not just one set of questions or questions from one person, but dealing with questions from numerous people and having experience, having dealt with these shilas. So this is part of why one goes to a Rav that sees these things often enough and is able to deal with them properly. So to say about something that you decided that it's not okay, or you decided it is okay. So many times we've seen a situation, heard the situation. Very often it happens that after there's a Taharas Hamishpacha review class, there's an uptick in the amount of shilas that come in, and that's a good thing. And often I'll hear from women, for years, I haven't asked this question. I'm getting a similar color for years. I was always sure that this is not okay. My life would be completely different. And sometimes you hear, and sometimes tragically it's the other way around as well. But I'm saying this, in this area of asking questions, a lot of unnecessary difficulty could be removed. So there are the questions of maras, and then there's the question of behavior. What is okay? What's not okay? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? It's a letter from the Rebbe about this. Somebody's clearly very upset about this. The letter in the Igros, Kodesh. Somebody's clearly bothered by some stuff that are going on, and the Rebbe instructs him that he should speak to a Rav to find out ha'asur v'ha'mutar, what is permissible and what is prohibited, and from v'ha'mutar, and that which is permissible, mahu ma'os, what is disgusting or what is appropriate. This is an important conversation to have, and there is no one answer that this is the answer across the board. If you learn halacha, particularly with regards to the halachos, Taharas Hamishpacha, you see that there's, so to speak, gray area. There's, so to speak, this is asur, and this is not recommended, and this is not ideal, and that's exactly what the Rebbe writes to this fellow, that there's the asur v'mutar, but even behamutar, there are other things as well. There are other considerations to be had. So it's true with regards to practically what makes a woman tmeya, what does not make a woman tmeya. How she could leave that status of tuma, and more so also with regards to the behavior, the practical behavior between husband and wife. What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? What is behavior of a yid, behavior of a chassid, and what is not? Because how do we have this information otherwise? Where do we take this information otherwise? If we don't speak to our Rav, So some of us might have some chaverim, okay? And we discuss these things with chaverim. Is that a good idea? Is that not a good idea? Where are your friends taking their information from? No, this is something that, as I mentioned, it's not, if you don't take it from a proper source to begin with, many of us don't. And you could go 5, 10, 15 years of marriage, and you could have avoided some major issues had you had that discussion. So I think that this is, with regards to asking shilas, the importance of having a consistency, of having a certain Rav that we speak to. Now, obviously, in the case of an emergency, it's appropriate to call somebody else. But in general, you speak to one person, and to actually speak. And so you could preface a conversation with saying, some type of communication of, I would like to discuss something with you that would take a half hour or 15 minutes or whatever it is. When would be a good time for that? The overcoming the barriers, something that's the challenges, the discomfort. Something extremely important is to know as many details as possible. Very often in having a conversation, when general terms are used, so the general answers are given. But then if you get into specifics, if you get into particular details, suddenly everything changes. And that's something that's very important to when asking a shaila of something's okay or not okay, to actually have all the details. And if a husband doesn't have all the details, it's perfectly fine to either ask his wife to speak to the Rav, or to be there if his wife feels uncomfortable for whatever reason, if she feels uncomfortable to speak to the Rav, which is perfectly fine. So the husband should be there in the same place with his wife so that he can get the information right away, as opposed to, let me get the information, I'll call you back, which ends up happening, a chain conversation of around 45 minutes that could have happened in 10 minutes. Now, if that's the only way for it to happen, if he's at the office and she's elsewhere, and an answer is necessary before Shkia, then so be it. So sometimes you need to have that three-way conversation and the breaks in between and so on. But if it could be avoided, it's much more beneficial. And a person likes to answer questions properly, likes to have as much information as necessary. And the more information, the better it is. More information actually very often changes the outcome of the answer, changes what the ruling is. So this is with regards to asking questions. With regards to what happens in Yemei Nida, what makes a woman Nida? So we understand. We all know, obviously, that what makes a woman, we know what it means that a woman becomes Nida. But what types of questions that come up? There is no, for the most part, we can't rely, or we do not rely on hargoshas today. I'm dealing with these types of shilas for quite a number of years, speaking to many rabbanim. In the course of the number of years that I've been doing this, I don't know of situations where there's a hargosha that we go by. However, if a woman says that she has a hargasha, she has sensations, it can't be completely dismissed. If a woman knows that her flow begun, it can't be dismissed. I remember a few years ago, a question came up. A woman, so a husband called that he was told, and this is correct, that a woman becomes Nida when she knows that she became Nida. In other words, if she has sensations of stomach aches and headaches or whatever it is, but she doesn't know that her flow begun or that she started spotting heavily or so on, she's not yet Nida. Only when she knows that she became Nida, that's when she's Nida. When she knows that the flow begun. Somebody has a question like this. If my wife knows that she became Nida, but she didn't see that she became Nida, she just has a feeling that she became Nida. I said, because her gushers don't really matter. So my wife knows that she became Nida, but she doesn't check, and she prefers, it works for the scheduling and vestes and so on and so forth. She would prefer to wait till after Shkia. It's a few hours before Shkia. So she doesn't have to look for the next few hours. So he wants to know if he waits for a few hours, or if she waits for a few hours before confirming, actually seeing that she became nida, does that push off the beginning of becoming nida? So that's making a latzonis. That's not correct. If she knows that her flow begun, then she can't say, oh, because I didn't see it, it's as if it didn't happen. I'll close my eyes. When you're a child, that works. I'll close my eyes and I'll act as if that doesn't exist, but it doesn't work like that in halacha. So on the one hand, if she knows for a fact that her flow begun, so then she became nida. On the other hand, just sensations or just feelings or whatever it is doesn't make a woman nida. So both of these sides have to be taken into account. And then the common comment that I'll hear is with regards to bedikas, that a bedika was made, but there's only a drop of blood on it. There's only a drop. So this also comes with not having clarity with regards to the difference between bedikas, stains, the beginning of what makes a woman nida. When there's a lack of clarity, so Baruch Hashem, in this situation, the question was asked. Bedika, but it's very, very small. Well, the halacha is that if it was a bedika, even if it's very small, it makes a woman nida. However, so a person might say, well, if it's even a drop of red makes a woman nida, so there's no point of asking questions. If I have a bedika cloth that has a drop of red on it, questions are not required. But that's also not the case, because in some situations, and this is a fascinating thing, I don't know why it is, but that's how it is. I once started keeping track, but I stopped very quickly, of the bedika cloths, which companies have red threads within red fibers in them. They do. It's a fact. Bedika cloths have red fibers in them, and some of them have more. Some companies have more. Some companies have less. Again, I started keeping track, but that didn't last very long. Especially if there's a red fiber within the area of the bedika, often it just looks like a bad bedika. You see red there, and it's clearly red. Once again, this comes with experience. It comes with knowing what to look for, knowing how to look at something. You can see, and I know for a fact that this is a thread. Sometimes it takes looking through a magnifying glass to actually see the thread. Whatever you have to determine. You can't just say, well, I have a feeling that it's a fiber. But it was my intention to bring one of these tonight. That also didn't happen. But this is a fact. So just give one example. Just the other day, there was another shayla also that came in. There was a red spot, a clear red spot. There's no doubts about it. Actually, I have a picture of that if somebody cares to see. But it was not blood. So on one hand, yes, it's a red spot, clearly in the middle of the bedika cloth, after bedika, but it was not blood. It was either dead skin or whatever it is. It's clear and it's perfectly fine. So how do you determine this? Okay, this goes back to the point of asking a question. But in general, the halacha is that if a woman makes a bedika, or if a woman knows that she became nida, or knows that her flow started, so then it's necessary at that point she becomes nida. A common question that people get is sometimes it happens with women that they start spotting, ksamim, and then they move on to, then the flow begins. So what point does she become nida? And this is something that takes a little bit either knowledge of the halacha or some type of mind that could handle these types of calculations. There are two different things that go on when a woman becomes nida. Number one, when does she become tamei? Number two, when do the 5 days begin? And what day to write on the calendar? And writing on the calendar is for two purposes. Yeah, one, write on the calendar in order to determine the vestige of the coming months and the calendar to come. Writing in the calendar is also at what point the 5 days started. There's some women that have a very short flow. So a woman, from the moment that she started staining, and let's say the stains were larger than made her tamei, so that's when she becomes tamei, and she can start counting 5 days from there. But her flow doesn't start, and for the calendar purposes, we don't mark the day when the staining begins. We mark on the calendar the day that the flow began. So two different things. The day that she becomes tamei, the day that she starts counting 5 days, is not connected to the day that you mark on the calendar of when she has to do the vestes for the coming month, and so on. Because these are two different things. One is for the purposes of Tumah, and in case she would be pilot Chvazera and so on. And the other one is for the calculations of the month of understanding her cycle, and for Haflagas and so on. And that's connected with a different type of calculation. So this is also something that's very, very important to keep in mind. With regards to colors, there are many different types of colors that are seen on Bdika cloths. Brown is not red, very, very similar to red, close to red, but this is something that the question has to be asked. And it's important to emphasize this because once again, of the notion that some people have that brown and red is all the same thing, and therefore there's no point of asking a question. That's not the case. In many situations, brown maris could be okay, and therefore that enables a woman to go to mikvah much earlier. So we have the becoming nida. There's also the idea of ksamim. The idea of ksamim, the idea of stains. This is something or discharges. And so there are two different types of. There's the ksamim, stains, and then there's also something that we have to keep in mind. So with regards to ksamim, if there's a kesem, if there's a stain on a garment of a woman, a stain by definition is something that you found. You weren't expecting it. It's not something that you thought would be there. In other words, a woman didn't have any type of sensation that she has to change her garments or whatever it is. But next time she saw her garment, she noticed that there was some staining there. If it's smaller than a gris, which is the size of a dime, if it's a kesem, if it's a stain, she's not tmeya. In other words, so a small dot on a garment is okay. It's not even a question. It doesn't even have to be brought, even if it's on white, it doesn't have to be brought to her. There's some people that feel more comfortable taking all their garments and all the questions, and it's perfect. If that's what makes them sleep better at night, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. But if there's a kesem that's smaller than a gris, that's not necessary to be brought. That's perfectly fine. If you're not sure if it's smaller than gris, that's a very legitimate question. It's an important question to ask. A kesem is also not placed on the calendar for the purposes of calculation, as well as a kesem on a colored garment is also not an issue that could be overlooked. Now, what happens with kinuchim? Kinuach, a woman that finds something on after when going to when wiping herself after going to the washroom. So this, if in general asking questions is makes people feel uncomfortable, sending these types of questions makes people feel much more uncomfortable. It's so yuck, this and that. But the fact is, there are Rabbanim that deal with these types of questions are used to it, and they deal with it perfectly fine. Otherwise, they're in their own business. But the rule is that kinuchim, that a woman should not look. What happens if a woman looks and she sees something? She shouldn't flush. What happens to a woman that can't contain herself? It's a very normal thing for women that they want to see the tissue afterwards. So either she has to go into the washroom wearing sunglasses. So because one of the ways of dealing with the shilas of kinuchim are when they're flushed down the toilet. So if they're available to be seen, so that it's dealt with that way. But if it's not available to be seen, the Rav has to start finding out what type of color was seen. And so if a woman insists that the kinuach she saw was perfectly red, and she saw it on white tissues, and many other, so many questions are asked because the questions determine what's the story with this kinuach. And the more certain she is she's red, the more difficult it is to be metahar. It's the job of a Rav that he tries to be metahar isha l'bayla. So if there's a woman that has an issue with kinuchim or looking at the kinuach, so some type of solution has to be found, either to turn the lights off or turn the lights dim in the washroom that she uses, or that she should wear sunglasses, or some type of other solution has to be found. Now, I'm saying a solution has to be found, but something that is extremely important. And actually, the Rebbe emphasizes this as well. Tavshin Lamates, the Rebbe speaks about it, that it's the objective or it's the mission of the husband to make sure that the mitzvahs at home are kept b'simcha and with mitlebedikait. And obviously, when the attitude of a husband, the attitude of, oh, had you not looked, had you not seen, had you not said, had you saved it, and so on. In general, once I said, as I mentioned earlier, Taharas Hamishpacha is not isolated. In general, it's the role of the husband to make sure that there's simcha and there's lichtigkeit at home, that there's joy and there's excitement about kiyum Torah mitzvahs. But if he becomes a grump because his wife, in his opinion, wasn't careful enough and looked when she didn't have to look, or she threw out the tissue instead of saving it, and so on, or becomes miserable about it, or becomes bitter about it, or salty about it in some way or another, he's not adding in the simcha in the home. It's definitely not adding in the simcha with regards to this mitzvah. So particularly with regards to things that you would say, it's up to you, things that happen because you're not in control of your body. Okay, fine, that's standard. This is your choice. Well, you can't control yourself. You have to keep on looking. The way the husband will behave, and the way he'll react, and the way he'll deal with this type of issue, that affects not just the mitzvah of Taharas Hamishpacha, but that affects the whole environment in the home. That affects the mood in the home, and so on. In general, with regards to a kinuach, there is a difference between if the kinuach happened after a bowel movement or passing water, depending on what's going on, and other medical conditions that a woman might be facing. And this could be a little bit uncomfortable to start asking questions. And sometimes a husband feels uncomfortable to share with her own, and sometimes a husband feels uncomfortable to ask these questions of his wife. It's true, I get it, that it's uncomfortable, but in order to deal with these types of questions properly, it's necessary to ask these questions, not, God forbid, in order to ask uncomfortable questions, but in order to try to be Matari Shalabayla. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times the discomfort is in our own head. Oh, he probably thinks it's so disgusting. If I would be dealing with it, I would be so grossed out. I'm sure he's also grossed out. He's not grossed out. He deals with this all the time. So either he likes being grossed out, or he came to terms with being grossed out. So either one or the other. Just do it. Just go with the flow, and you do. Hopefully, you have one experience as positive, another, and hopefully that makes one more comfortable. But the goal and the objective is Latar Isha Labaila. We know that Knesset Yisrael is compared to, or the woman is compared to Knesset Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is compared to the husband, vice versa. And the Chassan and Kala in the relationship between Hashem and Yid. It says that in Galus, that Yidden are referred to or called as Nida. So Beruchnius, there is a point of bringing together husband and wife, simply if we look at it just purely from a spiritual perspective, to bring the Yidden closer together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Begashmius, that is the objective of a person that deals with these issues in order to bring a husband and wife together. There's nothing greater than that in the world. It affects, as I mentioned, it affects everything and everybody. Family and the community. So many of the times that we deal with the halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha, we focus on the questions of is she nida, is she not nida? We deal with the questions of what makes a woman nida. We deal with the questions of what happens during the time of nida, including harchakas. And harchakas are something that are very important. Harchakas are not some type of offense for people that can't control themselves. Harchaka is something that is fundamental in keeping Taharas Hamishpacha. And to keep harchakas properly. And the way Chassidus explains the idea of keeping harchakas properly is not just Not just does it not take away from the relationship, but it increases the relationship and it intensifies the relationship. There's a lot to be said about that. Maybe we'll discuss this further later on or at a later point. But there's a mimer of the Rebbe actually in last week's Parshas Vayera. The Rebbe said 60 years ago, actually Rosh Chodesh Shvat. The Rebbe asked a question with regards to Shabbos. It's a mimer based on the mimer of the Alter Rebbe. We're not going to get into the full mimer. It's a very short mimer, a beautiful mimer. But 6 days a week we work, and then we reach the climax. We reach Shabbos. Shabbos is a time of perfection. Now, what happens Matzah Shabbos? So Matzah Shabbos, you're back in hell. So you're starting over again. It's like, I don't know if you played Shoots and Ladders. Sometimes you go down the slide, you end up at the first box once again. That's what happens on Matzah Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe explains, and the Rebbe expands on this, that when you really want to become close with something, you can't just keep on going in a direct motion. There has to be, as in the mashal that the Alter Rebbe gives, it has to be a dance. In order for you to dance, you have to sometimes take a step back so that you can take a step closer. This is true with regards to Shabbos and the weekday. So once on Shabbos, we reach a climax in our relationship with the Eibishter. There's a union. There's a perfection that the universe reaches on Shabbos. And then what? And once you have that perfection, you take a step back, not to where you started off from. There's a distance that is created for the purposes of desire and the longing to become closer again. And that's what you work on the whole week, so that becomes next Shabbos, you have that perfection again. And so we keep on climbing as in a cycle, as in a cylinder, higher and higher and closer to our destination, to our objective, rather than just going back and forth as like a pendulum. So it's true with regards to Shabbos, and it's true with regards to Taharas Hamishpacha. It's true with regards to, the Rebbe doesn't make this association, but I think that the association is quite clear. That when you take a step back, the idea of Harchaka is not, God forbid, to separate between husband and wife, to create some type of distance between them, an unhealthy distance. But the idea of Harchaka is to create a healthy tension, to create now that you've been connected, now that you've connected with each other, and you've reached a certain maximum that you're able to reach at this point. How are you able to take this relationship deeper? How are you able to make more out of this? How are you able to make this what it really could be? The connection, the deep and connection between husband and wife. How is it doable? And Torah tells us it happens with our Halachos, and our Halachos kept properly create the ability of closeness when the time is right. So we know the famous answer that somebody was having major issues with the shalom bayis, and the Rebbe said that when there's closeness, when there should be distance, what ends up happening is distance when there should be closeness. And some people look at it as a punishment. Aha, you did that wrong over there, so now you're going to suffer. Now you're going to suffer. But it's not about Chas v'Shalom, a punishment. One of the reasons the Eibishter gave us the mitzvah. We have the halachos of harchakas in order for us to be able to reach deeper and deeper elements of our relationship. So now what happens during harchakas? Yeah, there can't be any physical contact. And it says some frightening things in Gemara and in Kabbalah with regards to not being careful with harchakas. But we don't have to go there. I think that focusing on the fact that it's halacha and it's for our benefit and it's for the benefit of the couple that harchakos are kept properly, I think that this is a good enough motivation. Thinking about this idea of that this creates the possibility or the ability for the couple to become closer and deepen their relationship in the greatest way, this too is a good motivation. And if a person considers these ideas, both the positive and the negative, and it still doesn't motivate them and they still have a challenge with our harchakos, so we have to know, first of all, it is halacha. It's not some type of hidur or whatever because for weak people. It's an actual halacha. So keeping that in mind should help. And if that doesn't help, it's important to actually discuss it with a Rav, or discuss it with a Mashpia, discuss it with somebody to either motivate you or to try to figure out what the issue is. What's holding you back? But with regards to Halachos, what has to be kept in mind is that if a couple is traveling together, that they should either, during the time of Nida, that they should be on other opposite sides of the aisle if they're flying together somewhere. Or in general, the Arizal writes that that when there's movement, it's necessary to be careful that you don't move each other. But if there's kvius, in other words, if you sit down on any type of seat, a sofa, or whatever it is, that through you sitting down, you cause movement to your wife. So this is an issue. Wow, what's a big deal? So the Arizal explains that this refers to our relationship with Hashem once again, that we want our relationship with Hashem to be kavua, and then we could actually be closer with each other, as opposed to when there's movement, when there's instability in our relationship. It's true in our relationship with Hashem. It's true in our relationship at home. That when there's a kvius, when there's a solid relationship, closeness is even possible during this time of Nida. Now, closeness, not according to halacha. But we have to be much more careful when there's instability, when there's movement on the place that we sit. But so this once again reflects our relationship with Hashem. But this is halacha. And halacha is not there in order to, God forbid, take away our relationship or diminish or down or hurt our relationship. Is there to help build it and make it something greater than what it would be otherwise. And if a person has an issue with it, once again, that has to be dealt with. My big tragedy is in general, with us menfolk, that we have a hard time talking. But sometimes the healthiest and the best thing that we could do is to talk and to discuss something, to deal with an issue that we have in a healthy way, and not just to allow it to annoy us and frustrate us. And either we hold on to it and we're frustrated, or we chalila, we let go of it. Both of the options are not good. We have to keep Torah properly, and we have to keep Torah b'simcha. And one is not a contradiction with the other. There are many, many other topics to discuss with regards to the halachos. I'll mention another couple of things that come to mind. Sometimes it happens that a woman gets a heter that she could, if it's difficult for her to get shiva nekim, she gets a heter to make bdika on the first and the seventh day. So this is not something that we could self-prescribe. It's something that has to be given, a heter that has to be given by a Rav. But even if we do get such a heter, it's extremely careful. And unfortunately, this is not an uncommon mistake. That when a woman gets a heter for the first and seventh, they think that all they need to do is the first and seventh day. And that's not the case. That's never the case. First and seventh means that there's hefsek tara, and then on the next day she does a b'dika, and that's the first. And then the seventh day is the seventh day. A hefsek tara always has to happen. Now, ideally, a woman makes a b'dika twice a day in the shiva nekim. And this is also not some type of chumrah. This is halach and shulchan aruch. But there's also benefit to it. This could enable a woman to go to mikvah earlier sometimes, depending on what's going on. Just to give an example for this, where this is actually played out. A woman has a hard time with getting shiva nekim, so she gets a heter and she does a b'dika only the first and seventh day after the hefsek tara. So she made a b'dika on the first day, but she couldn't do it on the seventh day, or she forgot to do it on the seventh day. Now, sometimes you get a heter that she might be able to go to mikvah in such a situation as well. Sometimes not. But if that's the case, so then she has to start the counting 7 days all over again, because the Torah tells us with suffer a law that a woman has to count 7 days. So from this, we know that we trust a woman in doing her b'dikas, but we also know that she actually has to count. And if we don't have 7 counted days, this could mean that the shiva nekim has to start all over again. Not necessarily is this always the case, but it's a possible reality. As opposed to if there's a b'dika from the day before, it makes life much easier, that it could either not push off mikvah, or if it does, for much shorter. Medical procedures might make a woman nida. A pap smear does not make a woman nida. This is a common question. A pap smear does not make a woman nida. But sometimes when a pap smear is done, there could be irritation that could cause some bleeding. So if a woman has to go through some type of medical procedure, it's good to discuss it with a Rav in advance to find out if this would make her nida, not make her nida. Could it be sometimes if the procedure is done in a time when she's nida anyway, so it avoids any types of issues. She doesn't have to make bdikas during that time anyway, so that could avoid issues anyway. But this is if this is in the beginning of Shiva Nakim, she has to do a bdika, and she won't be able to do a bdika, so it just delays the Shiva Nakim considerably, or might delay it considerably. There are many other situations that could be spoken about, that could be addressed, but I think that will Mu'beres and Yeledes, a very important point. A woman that is expecting, a woman that just gave birth. Some people learned some Gemara and some Halacha, and they know that a woman that gave birth is Mesulekes Damim, so that there are certain leniencies. And same is also when a woman is expecting that she's Mesulekes Damim. The fact that she's Mesulekes Damim doesn't mean that if she saw a flow for one reason or another, that she could just disregard it. That's not the case. There is some implication to the fact that she's Mesulekes Damim, absolutely. She can make a kvius, investes, and so on. But she could still become nida even if she's expecting. And she could definitely become nida if she's nursing. And if she does become nida, we can't disregard it because she's expecting or because she's nursing. So there are many of these types of halachos, not just these types. All the halachos are something that is important to review. And even if you don't study the halachos in depth, but it's important to review the halachos, even just the technical, quickly overview of what it is that you have to be careful with, what it is that you have to be aware of. This helps keep the mitzvah properly, keep the kedusha properly, and keep the brachas that come along with it properly in the home. Going on and on. Each one of these topics could deserve a share on its own. We're not going to do that now. I'll conclude with a point, which I will use in the beginning of the next segment at the Fabrengen, a very powerful letter from the Rebbe in Igros Kodesh, where the Rebbe writes to Harav in Eretz Yisrael in 1955. The Rebbe, it appears that he was being machmir with regards to women, and he was causing, with regards to halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha. I'm not going to get into the whole context of the letter, but the Rebbe writes to him that he's being machmir with regards to halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha, causing that a husband and wife should not, that a woman should be nida, or that they shouldn't be together, that the couple shouldn't be together, shouldn't be intimate, more than necessary. Right, that there should be greater distance between husband and wife. And the Rebbe practically reprimands him, saying that he has to do whatever he can. Again, Zarav in Eretz Yisrael in 1955. This is before internet and before a lot of the industries that we have today that make the challenges associated with Taharas Hamishpacha and so on more difficult. That he has to do whatever he could to enable a husband and wife to be together. And pointing out that lack of intimacy between husband and wife negatively affects, and these are the Rebbe's words, the nerven, no nerven, no, the nerves and the life of the couple in general. In other words, lack of physical intimacy affects the lack of it affects a couple, not just with regards to this area in life, whatever, but it affects the nerves of the people and the general health of the couple. So the Rebbe says to him, and therefore you have to see to make sure that the husband and wife should be able to be intimate, and you should not cause them to be pirish, to be distant from each other more than necessary according to halacha. Obviously, the Rebbe is not telling the Rav that he should say things that are against halacha, but this Rav was pushing it more than what the Rebbe said was necessary. And you have to do whatever you can, that the couple should be able to be together. And now, because it affects not just with, even if it was just this mitzvah, we have to be careful with it. How much more so that this is a mitzvah that affects us in the deepest way. The intimacy between a husband and wife is something that is so crucial and something that is so sensitive and so delicate and so pure and so holy. The Kodesh HaKadoshim in the Beis HaMikdash was referred to as the Chadar HaMitos, the bedroom. This area of life is something that is so atzmiyuzdik, so essential in our life, that treating it with kedusha, with holiness and purity, brings us the greatest brachas. And I encourage you to do so, and may Hashem grant you amazing brachas in this area in life, and therefore, as the Rebbe says in this letter, in every area of life, your nerves and your life as a whole. Thank you very much. We have until 9:45. I could go for many more hours. I'm sorry. That's it. Okay. So I clearly didn't read the flyer carefully enough. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, we could continue talking now till 9:45. We will be from bringing Emir Hashem afterwards to discuss. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when we talk about the Taharas Hamishpacha, we talk about what we shouldn't do and what we have to be careful with, but we don't talk about the positive element and the approach of not just being careful, but the approach of what we should do and how we should live in a way that is elevated, in a way that is pure and holy. So Amir Hashem, we will address that in the Fabrengen. But talking about our Halachos, there's so many details to get into. Not recommended. This is a very good question. Are you allowed to smile at your wife during the time of our Halachos? So I'm not sure if you're joking or not. Exactly. Definitely not when we're talking about marriage. Joking about these things could take you to places that we don't want to go. But yes, a lot of times people have an attitude or have a feeling the time of our Halachos means that there has to be absolute distance to create some type of Berlin Wall between husband and wife. And they shouldn't look at each other, ideally frown at each other. Chas v'shalom to say that.
That's the reaction I get after I smile.
You get the frown back, and that's fine, and that's fine, and that's part of it. We'll address that later on as well. But the relationship between a husband and wife is a relationship best. One of the major issues that we face in relationships is that we don't properly define, we don't know how to properly understand the role of the husband and the role of the wife. And we base our definitions and we base our interpretation of the words either based on some ideas that we picked up by osmosis because it was never really discussed properly, or we pick it up from sources that are not terribly holy. I'm not even going to go further than that. And we don't really have, so, okay, so what am I supposed to do and how am I supposed to do it? So I think it's extremely important to understand the role and understand the definition of the relationship between husband and wife. And that is that a husband is a mashpia and a woman is a makabel. And a mashpia and a makabel is a mashpia is a giver, and a makabel is a receiver. And now, tragically, when people hear this, often they think in terms of purely technical or physical. The roles, the physical roles of the husband, whether it's physically during intimacy or some type of idea of finances, that he is a breadwinner. That's not what mashpia and makabel mean. It's a type of role that you have. A person could be bring in a huge amount of money and still be needy and still be not a mashpia. Mashpia. So what is a mashpia? And what is a makabel? And it's important to define this in order to describe what Halachos are properly. Again, all of this deserves proper attention, but the way a couple could succeed in the relationship is when they both embrace their role properly. And we're talking to men over here. So I'll focus on the mashpia aspect. And that is to give. And what are you giving? So in yeshiva, you've heard of the role of a mashpia. What is the role of a mashpia? What is a mashpia supposed to give their students? A mashpia that just gives information is not a mashpia. And especially in today's day and age, that there's recorded video and audio of the greatest teachers. So a mashpia that just gives over information doesn't really fill the role of a mashpia. It's not. That's not an information provider is not a mashpia. You're missing the best part. Okay. Yeah, exactly. You just mentioned that. A mashpia is not just an information provider or any type of provider or donor. That's not a mashpia. A mashpia is a person that fully understands and fully grasps and is fully invested in the person that they're trying to be mashpia on, to try to understand what their needs are and learn how to provide them without getting in the way. What do I mean by that? A perfect example for this is a teacher and a student. And it's a little bit uncomfortable to use this example because many of us might have negative experiences with teachers or not positive experience with teachers. Right. Yeah, it doesn't sound. Yeah, that's true. It doesn't sound politically correct. But when we properly understand these two roles, we understand that this is a very healthy way of living. Makabel doesn't mean that they're not smarter or more capable than mashpia. Makabel doesn't mean that you're making less money. Makabel doesn't mean that you're inferior in some way. But in this relationship, Rabbi Yosef Cairo became the student, Makabel, of the Arizal. Does that mean that Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and this is at the end of his life, was a very accomplished man by then. So what does that mean that Rabbi Yosef Cairo somehow was inferior to the Arizal? I don't know how to determine these things of who's greater than whom. I like to think that Rabbi Yosef Cairo didn't see himself as an inferior being by speaking to the Arizal. Becoming the student of somebody doesn't mean that you're inferior to them. So what does it mean? That here you have a person that is completely focused. Speak louder, speak louder.
Where is the white odyssey? The YR9 RST Zaltsman. I'm black.
Now it's an official simcha. And this is, I'm sorry, a white odyssey. That's so true. That's why you have to say the license number. And what you're mentioning is really at the core of a lot of issues between husband and wife. If I don't know my role and I don't know what I'm supposed to do, how can I be a good husband? And I assume that the same, not I assume, but the same thing is also with a wife. that if she doesn't know what her role is and what she's supposed to do, not the things that she's supposed to do. Is she supposed to make breakfast or not supposed to make breakfast? Is he supposed to be making this amount of money or that amount of money? It's not what I'm talking about. But if I don't understand my role and my position in this relationship, how could I actually live up to being a good husband? I don't know so what defines a good husband? Buying gifts on certain anniversaries? That is important, but is that what makes a good husband? And if I don't, does that make me into a bad husband? But if I need to know what my role is, so that way I can actually be the right role, I can fulfill my role properly. And the way to truly understand what a mashpia and what a makabel is by learning Chassidus. And the truth is that by learning Chassidus, we gain a very, very deep appreciation of what bittul is and what connecting to somebody else is, what unity with somebody else is. It's true. So Chassidus talks about it in terms of Achdus Yisrael and bittul in general, bittul to Hashem. But these things, as when we know that Ahavas Yisrael is a fundamental in Torah. It's not just a mitzvah, it's that too, but it's a klal gadol b'Torah. It was a Yechidus, it was a woman that went to Yechidus, and the Rebbe was giving her, so to speak, dating tips. Chas v'shalom to in any way be disrespectful to the communication between her and the Rebbe. But the Rebbe, she was trying to get married, and she was seeing a potential shidduchim. And at one point, she was seeing somebody. I'm sorry that it was either a chassan or a kala. I thought it was her, but now I'm thinking that it's him. That the Rebbe asked, "Do you like him or her?" It was him. Do you like her? And he said, "Well, I have Ahavas Yisrael." And you know the story? So it's a well-known story. Oh, you remember the story? So was it the Rebbe speaking to him or to her? Anyway, so it was either him or her. It was her. It was there. So Rebbe was speaking to the woman, and what do you like him? And she said, "Well, I have Ahavas Yisrael." And Rebbe said, "No. For a husband, you need to have much more than just Ahavas Yisrael. Or for your spouse, you need to have much more than just Ahavas Yisrael." But it's a fundamental of Torah of having. So Ahavas Yisrael in general enables us understanding what Torah says about Ahavas Yisrael enables us to be a good spouse. Understanding what bittul is enables us to be a good spouse, very practically speaking, and in a very real way. But this also touches on going back to the idea of Halachos. When I understand what a mashpia is not a person that provides information. A mashpia tries to build a makabel, tries to provide whatever they need. So if they need this type of information and that type of information, that's what the mashpia provides. And part of that is also understanding, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm not going to say I'm sure, but I'm sure that some of you in this room had an experience with a teacher that was on your case simply for himself. And he was thinking about himself and he had a need to speak. And somehow you became the victim of hearing him speak. And you weren't interested anymore in him speaking. You didn't want to hear what he's saying, but you had a need to do this. And this guy seemed to be like a good victim because he told you at some point that he appreciates your shiurim. Right? So you said, "Oh, wow, that was a great class." And now suddenly you became the guy that he keeps on going to whenever he has to say something. He's not thinking about whether you need to hear this. He's not thinking about whether this is important or good or uplifting for you to have. He's just thinking about, I have to get something off my chest. And I have to, it's about me. I'm not even going to get to other types of teachers, but if you think of the types of teachers, the negative and the negativity that you had in teachers and the positive elements that you had in teachers. A teacher, what is positive in a teacher? A teacher that thinks about my well-being and is not so concerned with the more he gets out of the way and the more he thinks about my needs and what it'll take for me to grow, and the more he understands me, more I see that he's interested in understanding me, And the more I see that he's not just willing to take a step back, but he does take a step back to allow me my space to grow into the ideas that he's sharing with me, to whatever it is that he's giving to me. So this is a proper mashpia. Mashpia is constantly giving, but sometimes he's giving positively and sometimes he's refraining from giving because he's either trying to figure out what's the next best step forward, or he's creating space where you could grow into what it is that you're trying to, what he's trying to give you. So there's never a point of disconnect. There's never a point of, I don't care about you. There's never a point of, there's no point of communication. There's always a point of communication. There's always a point of connection. But how do we express it? Okay, sometimes, and we know this in conversation, sometimes the best conversations that you have are the conversations in which you're silent. And sometimes people will tell you, I know this as a rabbi, sometimes people will come and we'll have a meeting for 45 minutes and they'll speak for 42 out of the 45 minutes. And I'll say, Rabbi, this is such a good meeting. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. But sometimes that's exactly what people need. Being listened to and feeling that they're being understood. That doesn't mean that you're engaging and you're giving and you're being proactive in this relationship at this point. No, you're creating space and you're taking a step back. And I think that the same thing is also could be said with regards to Halachos. Halachos are not that, God forbid, you're disconnecting. Halachos are not that you're going missing in action. Because halacha says that we can't have physical contact, and therefore, okay, fine. So, I'll tell you good morning, I'll tell you good evening. I'm not an obnoxious person. I'll say thank you and please before and after you serve me. But, no, during this time, just like the rest of the time, I'm preoccupied with what is best for you. How can I best serve you? How can I best give to you? At this point, halacha tells me that it's not by actually engaging in proactive giving, but that means that I'm listening more carefully. That means that I'm attentive. I'm more attentive in different ways. I'm not attentive physically. I'm attentive in the way I know that this is a need that you have, and I'm going to provide that to you. So in keeping halacha properly, in keeping the boundaries of halacha carefully, not just properly, keeping it carefully. And there are many stories about this. I mean, I heard, I spoke to a number of Rabbanim about this, where they told me that they spoke to many non-Chabad Rabbanim that had stories of people that the Rebbe told couples to, the couples asked the Rebbe a question or asked for a bracha, and the Rebbe told the couples that they should review the halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha, and some of these couples were surprised because they thought they kept halachos properly, and they wrote to the Rebbe again, and the Rebbe said to check with a Rav. And I heard from a number of different Rabbanim, both Chabad and not Chabad, that a couple came to them and they started reviewing the halachos of Taharas Hamishpacha and the halachos of Harchakos, and suddenly they realized that they weren't being particular with Harchakos. They didn't realize. And that's what they understood to be the message of the Rebbe, how particular they should be, how careful they should be. Because Harchakos enable us to create that better connection. Harchakos enable us to develop a deeper relationship. Now, sometimes it happens that a couple, due to different reasons, are forced halachically to have Harchakos for an extended period of time. This is a challenge. It's a real challenge. But I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier, that often, not always, but very many times, these extended harchakas could be shortened, and sometimes shortened significantly, if discussed with people that are expert in this area of halacha and it's a practical application. I've seen this time and again, but there's also a point of recognition. If the Eibishter tells me that now is the time for Harchakos, there's something in the relationship that I'm able to give that I would not otherwise been able to give. I would be able to be mashpia. I need to be mashpia now in this way, in a more passive way than in a more proactive way. That I'm able to be a giver in the not traditional way of giving. How is this doable? How is this practical? This takes bittul. And what is bittul? Not, God forbid, the often used translation of nothingness, but bittul is that I'm surrendered to something that is much higher than me. Challenging myself, how does the Eibishter want me to live right now? What's required of me now as a mashpia? When I'm not capable of expressing certain type of connection. And when I embrace this role properly, both aspects of this role, that I recognize that I'm mashpia, that means that I need to provide, that I need to give, that I need to care in an active way. And sometimes halacha tells me, the Eibishter tells me, take a step back, create space. The Matzah Shabbos, the after you had Shabbos, now is the time for Matzah Shabbos. Now dig back within yourself. Once that is created, you have the ability of the rejoining of the forces in a much greater way. I'll also say another point, that sometimes a Teirim could be dispensed in certain cases of, certain extreme cases of where Halachos are creating an issue. There is a possibility, al pi halacha, to get a heter to not follow certain halachos. The examples of this are not necessary to get into, but it's possible. In other words, you have certain situations, and I've heard some of these situations where there's a real issue for one reason or another. A Teirim could be found, and once halacha tells us that this is okay, once a proper Rav tells you, not online, I heard from a friend that heard from his sister-in-law, but I actually spoke to a Rav, and the Rav told me that this is okay, so then it becomes perfectly fine. And then at that point, this is my way of giving hashpah. But the role is to live a life of bittul to Hashem. Living a life bittul to Hashem means that I'm living fully invigorated, fully invested, fully conscious, fully aware of who I am and what I am. This enables me to be the proper shliach of Hashem in my home, in my environment, in my community, and on earth, to bring a dir b'tachtonim. May we be successful in doing so. Yishkoyach.
I wanted to take the opportunity, first of all, to thank our sponsor tonight, Roman and Susie Goldstein, for sponsoring all of the refreshments and whatnot, as well as to Akiva Bolter for broadcasting today's shir and asking the question. Yes, right now we'll have just a 2-3 minute, I guess, intermission. If some can help to pack 6 tables, just pull out 3 of them, and we'll make like a nice A Fabrengen setup. I guess, yeah, 5 minutes. Guys can hop around and light it, and the Fabrengen will resume in just a few minutes. Please stick around.
We're going to take a break from all those on Zoom want to partake in the Fabrengen, Shvat, and Shovavim, and stand by. We'll probably start in about 10 minutes or so. If not, go get a l'chaim, put your cameras on so we could see you. Thank you so much for joining.